A ship was diving down to a depth of 100 meters beneath the sea when suddenly a giant octopus appeared and wrapped itself tightly around its hull. As the octopus's tentacles tightened, everyone inside the ship was filled with fear. If they didn't do something, the glass windows would crack. Nemo, the captain, immediately donned a diving suit and went outside to confront the octopus. He had only intended to fire the gun to scare it, but to his surprise, the octopus sensed the danger and immediately swung its tentacle, knocking Nemo away. Fortunately, he was not injured. At that moment, a whale appeared and took hold of the octopus, and the two engaged in a struggle. Nemo was bewildered as he witnessed this, but fortunately, in the end, the whale had won. It bit off the octopus's tentacle and swam away. Nemo returned to the ship to cheers and congratulations from the crew, who thought he was a brilliant captain. Little did anyone know, not long ago, Nemo was still a labor camp convict in the occupied land. He was responsible for repairing the ship for the East India Company. Strangely, everyone was in high spirits that day because the secret ship they had been constructing was nearing completion. This was also their opportunity to escape from prison. Each day, after coming up on deck to have their chains removed, they waited for the guards to let their guard down. They saw the ship's designer, Gustav, signaling to Nemo, and everyone immediately sprang into action. The others seized the guards' weapons and locked them in a storage room. After that, they returned to their workstations to prepare to start the enormous vessel. However, at that moment, they were most afraid of their teammates sabotaging their efforts. Someone hadn't held the gun properly, causing it to fire on its own and make a loud noise. Although no one was injured, the guards outside noticed the commotion, and a battle was about to break out. The future crew members of the Nautilus ship, eager for freedom, worked hard to cut the ropes holding the ship in place. Relying on their numerical advantage, they managed to subdue the guards. However, the guards found weapons, and the slaves were suppressed, unable to raise their heads. Fortunately, Nemo acted quickly and shot the guard controlling the weapons. The crew rushed toward the rope that had been shot, but Nemo felt immense pain as he witnessed his comrades dying tragically. He wanted to rush in to save them but was held back. Luckily, when a crew member fell, he dropped the lamp he was holding. As the rope was burned, the crew aboard the ship started the engines. In the stunned gaze of everyone, the Nautilus ship broke free from its chains and began its miraculous journey of 20,000 nautical miles under the sea. Under Gustav's guidance, the crew gradually adapted to their new roles as the ship sank to the ocean floor. The soldiers on shore wanted to open fire, but their shots did no damage to the ship's hull. Nemo also stood at the captain's position, carefully steering the ship as it slipped through the cracks in the rocks. In the depths of the sea, Nemo could only rely on his sense of touch, groping in the darkness. If they collided with a rock wall, everyone would perish. Fortunately, everything remained safe, and they overcame the obstacles to emerge into the vast open sea. However, this freedom came at a price. The East India Company certainly did not let them off. As the oxygen in the compartment dwindled, Nemo was preparing to surface for air, when unexpectedly, a ship, mistaking their vessel for a whale, began to attack. Nemo didn't back down, and immediately accelerated, charging towards the vessel. This was only the Nautilus's first voyage, and the equipment had not yet been pressure tested. The engine suddenly malfunctioned. Although they managed to ram the other ship, the interior of their submarine was also heavily damaged. Nemo had no intention of harming anyone. He kindly allowed women and children to board the Nautilus, swapping them for other crew members on the lifeboats. Suddenly, a man appeared, said that he would kill Nemo. However, Nemo told him he had mistaken the person and then maneuvered the Nautilus to dive to the ocean floor. Nemo decided to head north to search for the hidden treasure of a Spanish shipwreck. If successful, he would return to Gustav. But Gustav suggested they first go to a French port to repair the ship and stock up on supplies, as food aboard was running low. Nemo kindly took in 3 additional women and a dog. Reaching the sea to the north smoothly was impossible. Lucas, one of the women, overheard Nemo's conversation and hurriedly asked when he would release her. It turned out that Lucas was the fiancé of an Indian prince and had been captured by Nemo. While they were speaking, they heard strange noises outside the ship. It turned out that a pod of sperm whales had surrounded them. Everyone was astonished by the sight. Such a scene could only be seen at the bottom of the sea. They rushed to the equipment compartment and discovered they were over 100 meters deep, and the engine had stopped working. If they didn't fix it in time, they would either die from suffocation or be crushed by the pressure of the deep sea. Just then, Lucas proposed a solution, but Nemo could not entrust the fate of the Nautilus to a woman. While they were anxiously searching for a solution, a loud noise suddenly echoed. The sturdy ship was about to be unable to withstand the pressure on the ocean floor. At that moment, Nemo set aside his pride and asked Lucas to propose a solution. The soldiers retrieved a cannon from the compartment and lit the fuse. The length of the fuse determined the time to explosion. As long as they could calculate the weight and density of seawater, the vessel would explode even if it were tens of meters deep in the ocean. The crew frantically worked to repair the damage, but since they had fled in a hurry, the submarine lacked torpedoes or weapons, leaving them with no choice but to escape. The Nautilus sank to a depth of about 100 meters. The admiral on the ship at sea was determined not to let them escape. The admiral ordered the soldiers to extend the fuse and throw the bomb. bomb. Those inside the submarine dared not breathe heavily. If they were hit, the only outcome would be a tragic death. However, their journey of 20,000 leagues had not even begun, so how could they die so soon? Fortunately, the bomb did not hit them, and those inside the submarine breathed a sigh of relief. But before they could celebrate, the scouts on the ship heard strange sounds from the depths of the sea. What was even more frightening than the bomb was the unidentified creatures lurking in the deep ocean. No one expected the world beneath the waves to be so terrifying. Not long before that, Captain Nemo had sunk to the bottom of the deep sea due to engine failure. To save everyone's lives, he had no choice but to plead for Lucas's help to create a makeshift engine powered by human strength. The crew worked hard to turn the crank, but no matter how hard they tried, the Nautilus showed no signs of surfacing. Their vigorous activity caused the oxygen in the compartment to dwindle, leading to dizziness and rapid heartbeats, and the dog was on the verge of death. Lucas still had some awareness and sensed a gas leak somewhere. As the crew struggled to breathe, they indeed heard the sound of gas escaping, but their loud voices had drowned it out. Lucas immediately tore a piece from her dress, soaked it in oil, and tied it around the leaking pipe. With Nemo's assistance, the pipe was repaired. Seeing a glimmer of hope, the crew gave their all, and finally managed to bring the ship back to the surface. Everyone gasped for fresh air, and after narrowly escaping death, they learned a valuable lesson. Having met in adversity, they recognized that the equipment aboard the Nautilus was inadequate, and returning to shore was the best option. First, Lucas spotted an island ahead. Ignoring her thick clothing, she immediately jumped overboard and swam toward the island, followed by 2 Indian crew members. Nemo helplessly watched this scene. He could not shoot at them. Suddenly, a group of soldiers charged in from the shore. They had received word from the East India Company and knew that the crew of the Nautilus consisted of escaped criminals. They quickly set out in a fishing boat to chase after them. Lucas realized that these soldiers would not spare them, so she turned around and swam back toward the Nautilus. Just as she thought, even though Lucas's fiancé was a nobleman, Lucas meant nothing to the East India Company. They would not spare the Nautilus for the sake of one woman. Meanwhile, Nemo encountered a major problem. The power suddenly went out in the compartment. He and Gustav checked every nook and cranny, but could not find the source of the issue. In a moment of desperation, Lucas returned inside. She calmly pulled a steel wire from the power line. It turned out that she had sabotaged the engine to escape. Nemo realized this, but could do nothing to stop Lucas. The urgent matter now was to escape from the pursuing soldiers. As everyone returned to their positions, the Nautilus began to dive down. The soldiers panicked on the deck, helplessly watching the massive ship disappear beneath the surface of the sea. Although they had escaped danger, the crew's morale remained a significant concern. Nemo had to come up with a reason to keep them on board, but using force was not his style. While Nemo pondered this, an opportunity arose. A fishing boat was using a baby whale as bait to catch a gigantic sperm whale. The crew debated whether they should save the whale. Nemo didn't want to get involved, but one remark from Lucas made him change his mind. She pointed out that a mother was trying to protect her young. When Nemo ordered the Nautilus to surface, the fishermen had not yet had time to understand what was happening. Nemo rushed to the deck and jumped onto the whale's back. The fishermen, of course, would not let their prey escape and began firing their hunting rifles. At that moment, the crew of the Nautilus became united. The first mate controlled the ship's distance, while the sailors with guns provided cover to buy time for Nemo. When the rope was cut, Nemo grabbed a hook and dove down with the whale. A little while later, Nemo resurfaced, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time, they felt the power of unity. Nemo wanted to take the opportunity to advise the fishermen to release the baby whale, but it was their main source of income. They told him that if Nemo wanted to save it, he would have to buy it with money. Although Nemo had just escaped from prison and had no money, Lucas did. Without hesitation, Nemo threw Lucas's gold bracelet to the fisherman, since Lucas had agreed to save the baby whale, and also to take revenge on her for plotting to harm him. However, the bracelet was a keepsake from Lucas's father, and Nemo regretted it when he found out. This whole trip had been one of meddling in others' business, and as a result, the East India Company had discovered their whereabouts. The company sent the Redknot, a steel ship, to chase them. While the submarine was difficult to detect at the bottom of the sea, the Redknot was equipped with advanced sonar technology capable of amplifying underwater sounds. Nemo knew this, so he ordered the crew to shut off the engines and wait until the enemy left without finding anything. The crew could stay quiet, but the dog couldn't. As soon as the Nautilus was detected, the captain of the Redknot showed a triumphant expression. Based on the photographs, it seemed that the captain of the Redknot was familiar with Nemo. Meanwhile, aboard the Nautilus, the dog was barking at the door of the compartment. The crew told the dog to stop barking. As a crew member approached the dog, he noticed a soldier's foot sticking out. The crew member was immediately threatened by the soldier with a knife, and they were told to remain silent if they didn't want to die. To dive to a depth of 100 meters the 19th century, only the legendary Nautilus could do it, but the undersea world world was extremely dangerous. Suddenly, a giant octopus appeared outside, wrapping itself tightly around the hull. Nemo tried to start the engine, but found the ship unresponsive. As the octopus's tentacles tightened, the crew could only feel the terror emanating from the deep sea. If they didn't act, the ship's glass windows would crack. As captain, Nemo looked at the diving suit that had never been tested. He had the duty to ensure the safety of everyone on board. This was also an opportunity to solidify his position as captain. Nemo did not want to confront the octopus directly. He thought that firing a shot would be enough to scare it away. Fortunately, the diving suit had no issues as Nemo climbed outside the ship. Just as he was about to fire, the octopus seemed to sense the danger and swung its tentacle, throwing Nemo aside. Fortunately, the quality of the diving suit was good, and the water helped reduce the force of the impact. Nemo was unharmed, but the Nautilus was not so lucky. The octopus arrogantly clung to the ship, treating it like a toy. Nemo ran to get a harpoon gun, but the octopus noticed him and swung its tentacles once more. Before Nemo could react, the whale he had saved earlier appeared. The whale grabbed the octopus to pull it away, but the octopus stubbornly refused to let go. Thus, the octopus and the whale struggled against each other. For the first time, Nemo felt the insignificance of humanity. Fortunately, the mother whale ultimately triumphed. It bit off the octopus's tentacle, then swam away. The crew breathed a sigh of relief, and Nemo realized an important truth. To survive in the depths of the sea, befriending whales was undoubtedly the right choice. Nemo returned to the ship to the cheers of the crew, but there was still a pressing problem. The red knot was waiting to sink them. Once the Nautilus started, it would be detected by the red knot, but fortunately, Nemo came up with a plan. Although the torpedoes on board hadn't been armed with explosives, they could still be launched. They could remove anything that might emit sound inside, fire it off to distract the red knot, and take the opportunity to escape. When the torpedo was launched, the red knot scout was excited to detect the sound, and Nemo's plan succeeded. The red knot was diverted by the torpedo and left the area, allowing the Nautilus to escape danger once again. Next, they needed to go ashore to resupply. However, the dog bit Lucas's skirt, as if something urgent was happening. It turned out that one of the crew members was being threatened by a soldier. Lucas calmly promised that the soldier would be safe, and she successfully persuaded him to drop his weapon. But this soldier also had been quite unlucky. When Nemo had escaped from prison, this soldier was knocked out and thrown into the storage room. When they released the prisoners, they forgot to let him out. The soldier said that he did not want to do this job. He only wanted to become a crew member and venture out to sea. But Nemo wasn't easily convinced by the soldier's words. He agreed with Lucas not to kill the soldier, promising that he would be set free when they reached the dock. However, resupplying turned out to be a problem. At that time, the United Kingdom was known as the empire on which the sun never set. Wherever they went, they were pursued by the East India Company. Nemo pointed to an island on the map, Indonesia, which in the 19th century was still a Dutch colony. Indonesia and the United Kingdom were in fierce opposition to each other, and sometimes they might be able to buy some supplies. But the Nautilus was a large target. As soon as Nemo and his crew landed, they were spotted by local soldiers. The lord there, who called himself Casimir, had no ill intentions, for after all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. However, when Casimir saw the goods Nemo had for trade, he almost laughed out loud. To Casimir, they were nothing more than rubbish. But since they were friends, and Casimir recognized Nemo as the Prince of India, knowing that he was acquainted with Nemo's father, he agreed to provide supplies for free. It only needed a little time. The group was allowed to rest at Casimir's palace, and Lucas was the first to step forward and declare her noble identity. Nemo also wanted to learn more about his father. They were taken to the palace, leaving only a few people behind to handle the supplies and guard the Nautilus. The East India soldier was thrown into the local prison. For the first time in a long while, the crew had some free time to relax, but no one realized this was all a trap. Unexpectedly, Gustav discovered an ancient book in Casimir's library, which contained the names of all the sailors who dreamed day and night of achieving their goals. At the same time, the crew members who were receiving the supplies noticed something abnormal. The food Casimir had sent was spoiled. Casimir had no intention of making friends. Crew member Kai had no choice but to rush to the palace. Nemo learned for the first time about his father, who had once been the king of a small country and had partnered with capitalists to open a colonial company. However, later on, the capitalists found a way to force him out of the company. They first framed Nemo and put him in prison, then sent assassins to kill his father. In this era, the stronger party always won, and without an heir, the property naturally went to the capitalists. However, Nemo was still alive. Casimir said he could help him reclaim the assets. The two conversed in harmony, and when Casimir learned that Lucas was knowledgeable about mechanical principles, he became very excited. His ice-making machine was broken, and no one could fix it. When they reached the living room, Nemo was still thinking about his father's story. He knew he was a prince, but he didn't expect the story behind it to be so complicated. Nemo quietly returned to Casimir's study to take a photo of his father as a keepsake. By chance, he discovered that the telegraph machine was buzzing non-stop, and on it was information about about Casimir reporting to the East India Company. After being discovered, Casimir felt a bit awkward, but in the face of benefits, there were no friends at all. One could only blame the British Empire for offering too many advantages. While Nemo was locked in the prison, the crew members were focused on eating and drinking. They had heard of a local tribe of cannibals, and with the fierce looks of the soldiers, it seemed like they might be eaten. Even the delicious cake was hard to enjoy. But what they didn't realize was that the soldiers weren't looking to eat them, they were just coveting the food on the table. The crew had served Casimir for many years, but they had never been treated this way. Kai had approached the palace, but before he could inform everyone to retreat, he discovered food inside and needed to think of a way to get it back to the Nautilus. At that moment, Lucas was about to finish the ice-making machine, but as she reached the final step, she heard a strange noise coming from the floor. It seemed that someone was whispering. Following the voice, she found people trying to transport coal, using steam to supply power sources. Feeling sorry for them, Lucas decided to bring them outside. The band and everyone outside were stunned by the sight. In fact, they were all the parents of the children, having sold themselves to Casimir with no human rights at all. The little girl looked at her father. Even though he signaled her not to eat, she couldn't help herself. Just then, Casimir approached, having just cursed Nemo and released a soldier from the East India Company. Now, seeing a group of slaves appear, Casimir was about to explode with anger when Lucas stopped him. However, Casimir was ready to reveal his true nature and no longer hid it. He walked up to the little girl and sprinkled dirt on her piece of cake, believing that slaves did not deserve to eat such food. The slaves were furious at this scene and stood up to take the punishment for their children. Unexpectedly, Casimir did not see them as human. He ordered the execution of the children on the spot. The crew, witnessing this, could no longer contain themselves. Jagadish stepped forward to call for rebellion. Under Casimir's humiliation, the slaves were filled with rage, but Casimir did not believe they would dare to fire their guns. He held the gun to his own throat, challenging them. Seeing this, Jagadish was also stunned. They had become slaves for a reason. After Casimir left, he ordered the soldiers to fire. As both sides began their attack, Gustav heard the gunfire outside and quickly tore the map of Atlantis, preparing to return to the Nautilus. Lucas went to the study to find Nemo and accidentally encountered that soldier. He had stolen the prison key and told Lucas to go rescue Nemo while he would support her. Even in this critical situation, Nemo and Lucas still managed to argue. After Nemo promised Lucas that he would take her to Mumbai, he suddenly reached for a hairpin to unlock the door. Lucas, seeing this, felt helpless and had no choice but to pull out the key. Meanwhile, under Jagadish's leadership, the slaves had achieved victory. They shouted for liberation and marched toward Casimir's palace. Jagadish entered the study and discovered the soldier sneaking around. The soldier explained that he wanted to cut off communication with the East India Company. He then used a knife to damage the telegraph machine. However, Jagadish quickly noticed something was off. The telegraph had sent a message before it was destroyed. It turned out that the soldier intended to pose as a good person, to sneak onto the Nautilus and act as a spy for the Dreadnought to harm Nemo. Jagadish uncovered the secret and was shot dead by the soldier. Meanwhile, Casimir received the good news that Lucas had repaired the ice-making machine. When the slaves rushed in, Casimir decided to temporarily evade them while waiting for reinforcements. He hid in a secret chamber in the study, pulling the injured Jagadish inside with him. Meanwhile, Nemo had gathered at the dock, and Kai had also brought supplies. However, in their haste, the wheel broke, causing all the food to spill onto the ground. Nemo noticed the Dreadnought at that moment. A soldier ran over to say that Jagadish had been injured and taken prisoner. Since the soldier had previously given the key to Lucas, Nemo agreed to let him board the ship. Although the crew did not want to leave Jagadish behind, for the safety of the Nautilus, Nemo made a decision as captain. A few soldiers pushed the boy out into the lake and began to beat a drum. A sea monster emerged from the water, and it was difficult to determine what kind of creature it was, but liked to eat meat. Nemo and Lucas dared not move. Fortunately, their teammates arrived just in time, using homemade grenades to cover them. However, the explosion angered the sea monster, which began to move quickly on land. Fortunately, the monster was so large that everyone had a chance to escape, while the soldiers became the creature's meal. Nemo had no time to explain to the crew. He hurriedly directed everyone to run back to the Nautilus. Lucas mentioned that they were being chased by a fish. As everyone was puzzled, the sea monster chased them onto the beach, its massive body slithering out of the forest. The crew, terrified, questioned whether that was really a fish. They did not dare to stay long, and fortunately the creature did not spot the Nautilus. But once the ship started up, it seemed as if an electric current passed through, and the monster immediately zeroed in on its target. The creature had a significant advantage in the water. Before the Nautilus could fully start, the monster wrapped itself tightly around the ship. When the ship tilted to one side, everyone could not keep their balance. However, that was not the scariest part. When the Nautilus sank, the entire body of the sea monster emitted light. It turned out to be an electric eel. Under the strong electric current, the crew was unharmed, but the ship's electronic equipment sparked everywhere. Nemo immediately ordered the engines to be shut down to avoid damage. However, during this journey of 20,000 leagues, the electric eel was not the most frightening thing. Not long before, while the Nautilus was resupplying, it was intercepted by the Red Knot ship from the East India Company. Soldiers fired underwater cannons, then ignited them. They heard the loud explosion, and the firecracker skimmed past the hull of the Nautilus. After a few seconds of silence, the firecracker exploded. Gustav understood the intention of the Red Knot ship. They did not want to destroy the Nautilus, but rather intimidate the crew into surrendering. Upon hearing this, Nemo immediately came up with a plan. He decided to do something that the Indians would greatly appreciate. Nemo surfaced and began to provoke them. The soldiers immediately opened fire. Nemo then dove back down and swam towards the shooter. The soldiers thought Nemo had gone mad, so they ordered a change in firing direction. Unexpectedly, the Nautilus began to start up, using its rotating wheel to make the sand at the ocean floor fly in all directions. Nemo was also obscured, and as the soldiers stood there in confusion, Nemo quickly appeared at the glass door. He pulled out the axe from behind his back and struck the glass door. Because the glass of the Nautilus was specially made, but the Red Knot was different. When the glass door shattered, Nemo was thrown out, but a crew member in diving gear quickly brought him back inside the ship. Thanks to this plan, they managed to escape the pursuit of the Red Knot ship. However, because they did not have time to transport supplies, they still had to face the issue of food shortage. Fortunately, the crew treated the Nautilus like a second home. Some tried to grow vegetables, while others went outside to catch fish. Although they didn't catch much, it was enough to solve the immediate problem. The Nautilus sailed through the Strait of Malacca into the Pacific Ocean and began its adventurous journey. While they could rely on fishing for food, there was no fresh water to drink. One day, Nemo and his crew went to an island to search for a source of drinking water. As soon as they reached the shore, they saw a dragon fruit tree full of fruit. Nemo had Suyin pick the fruit while he and 3 others went to search for water. However, no one expected that the dog seemed to have inhaled some kind of flower part, which would bring consequences later. This was Blaster's first time on a strange island, and he was very excited. Not wanting to interrupt Nemo while he was with Lucas, Blaster ventured into the forest and accidentally discovered a crab that was camouflaged as a rock. Seeing that it could be eaten, he followed the crab into the forest. Blaster did not notice any signs of human presence nearby. The crab led him to its mother, and Blaster was terrified. Fortunately, the mother crab only wanted to warn him. Just as Blaster sighed in relief, he noticed countless skulls above his head. Blaster ran away. He bumped into Nemo. Nemo reassured him not to be afraid, as it seemed this place was not safe. As they were about to turn and leave, unexpectedly, they stumbled into a trap. The trap was activated immediately, but luckily, due to long disuse, some parts had corroded. The alarm bell rang loudly, and the soldiers at the camp were busy drawing lots. They had agreed that if they couldn't find food and water, they would kill one person to feed the sea monster. Among them, there was a soldier who had to draw the shortest straw. Just as everyone was tying the soldier up and preparing to shoot him, the sound of a bell rang out. The bell meant that an intruder had been detected. Perhaps the prey had been caught. By the time they reached the trap, Nemo had still not found a way to escape. He wanted to pull out the knife from his back, but Lucas stopped him, fearing that Nemo might touch her sensitive areas. Just then, a figure appeared ahead. When the sound of something falling was heard, the soldiers realized the prey had escaped. They immediately quickened their pace towards it. After the girl introduced herself to Nemo, she led them to her hiding place. Nemo noticed that the girl was climbing the mountain with ease, suggesting she had lived on the island for quite a long time. Nemo followed her into a foul-smelling cave. Suddenly, Nemo slipped, realizing that they were inside a hollow tree. The soldiers were chasing them below, and Nemo dared not even breathe too loudly. But just at that moment, a spider crawled up his hand. From its color, it seemed to be venomous. Surprisingly, Lucas wasn't afraid at all, and even picked the spider up to scare Nemo. After that, she threw the spider down below. After a difficult journey, they reached the girl's home. She grew her vegetables vegetables and even made a water filtration system. Nemo's ship desperately needed someone as versatile as her. Both parties agreed to head back to the Nautilus, but Blaster caused trouble because of his curiosity. After venturing deeper into the cave, he was frightened by a snake and slipped, falling outside, where he encountered the soldiers who were chasing them. Fortunately, Blaster was smart and didn't reveal the location of the Nautilus. He only told them that their ship had been sunk. The soldiers, seeing that they couldn't ask anything, the opponent used Blaster as bait for the sea monster. The raft disturbed the monster that was lying at the bottom of the lake. Nemo and Lucas arrived just in time, and the soldiers were immediately captivated by Lucas's beauty. While they were distracted, Lucas enchanted them, and the girl threw down a rope to rescue Blaster. When the sea monster surfaced, the soldiers thought they could control it to attack others, but to their surprise, the creature swallowed one of them whole. When they returned to the Nautilus, the girl stood on the deck, stunned. She had never seen a submarine before. With the language barrier, she couldn't believe that something so advanced existed in this age. But right after that, she was swallowed by the sea monster. The creature was so long it could coil around the Nautilus. Though it wasn't venomous, it was capable of emitting electric shocks. Nemo had to activate the engines and figure out a way to escape danger. Lucas, whose father was a physicist, so she was very knowledgeable about physics and machinery. After some calculations, she came up with a plan. They needed to use the engine to retaliate against the eel. If the electrical current was strong enough, at least 1500 volts, it would shock the eel. More precisely, it would electrocute it. In theory, this plan seemed feasible, but one careless move could result in electrocution. Nemo supported the idea. As long as they didn't damage the engine, Lucas was free to proceed however she saw fit. Actually, Nemo also wanted to put on diving gear and go outside to deal with the eel himself, but the eel's body was pressing against the hatch, preventing him from getting out. Now, they could only trust Lucas. However, what they didn't know was that an even greater danger was lurking. Earlier, the dog had gotten contaminated with pollen from the island. When it entered the ship, the pollen scattered throughout the entire compartment. Meanwhile, the crew members were preoccupied with finding a way to apply electricity to the eel. As the engine started, the voltage increased, and the eel sensed something was wrong. It began to release electrical discharges. The voltage reached its maximum, but the eel still didn't react. Lucas trusted her calculations, but reality shattered her confidence. After sparks of electricity flew, the eel continued to coil tightly around the Nautilus. The crew members who were electrocuted fell to the ground, and despair spread among them. The symptoms of contamination became clear. Gustav criticized Lucas for damaging the engine, and a heated argument broke out between him and Nemo. It seemed that they still didn't fully trust each other. Just then, Lodi intervened in the quarrel, reminding them not to forget that there was still an electric eel wrapped around them. Gustav walked away, and Lucas, smoke rising from her, promised Nemo that she would make it work. But as the pollen spread, the situation worsened. First, Cuff lost control and smashed the pressure gauge. Gustav discovered that a soldier had been secretly snooping through documents, but he didn't notice that the soldier had been infected and had lost consciousness. Gustav didn't pay attention to anything else, only caring whether his map of Atlantis was still there. With Nemo's help, Lucas managed to complete the electric discharge device. She didn't think her calculations were wrong, so she decided to try again. However, the result was still the same. At that moment, there was a sound from outside as the eel shifted position, and Nemo didn't have time to calm Lucas. He just instructed her to adjust the engine, but she couldn't accept the idea of failing. Meanwhile, Lodi had also lost all patience with Lucas. She believed that Lucas was responsible for everything that had gone wrong. Lodi thought it was Lucas's arrogance and refusal to recognize her mistakes that would prevent her from ever succeeding. As Lucas sat there, frustrated and reflecting on herself, Nemo rushed to the window and saw that the eel had actively released its grip on the ship. However, the temperature around them kept rising, signaling that the eel had sensed danger and was about to retreat. But in its haste, the eel's fin got stuck on the side of the ship. As the eel swam away, everyone could finally see what was before them: a volcanic mountain at the bottom of the sea. Suyin, seeing this, wanted to turn the ship around, but then realized that the ship wasn't moving. It turned out that the side of the ship was stuck. Nemo informed Lucas that they needed a power source, but she was still struggling with self-blame. At that moment, Blaster, in the torpedo compartment, discovered several crates of cotton soaked with nitroglycerin. If the temperature inside the Nautilus rose too high, the ship would explode. The only option was to carry the crates to the ship's cooling compartment, but Blaster couldn't do it alone. Nemo sent Kai to help him, while Nemo suited up in diving gear to go outside and remove the eel's fin that was stuck. However, Nemo unexpectedly came into contact with the pollen. On his way to the diving compartment, Nemo seemed to see the shadow of his late wife. He moved towards it and returned to their old house. His daughter obediently handed him a gift, which was the origin of the name Nautilus. As Nemo collapsed into a chair, losing consciousness, the crew members seemed to lose all hope. the Nautilus headed straight for the volcano. Kai and Blaster had managed to get the crate of explosives into the cooling compartment in time, but Blaster noticed a dark spot on Kai's hand. Kai thought it was just dirt and didn't give it much thought until Blaster collapsed, losing consciousness. At that moment, Kai realized that a contagious disease had spread among the crew. The immediate priority was to deal with the crate of explosives. After Kai placed the crate fully into the cooling compartment, he discovered that the infection on his hand had disappeared. It turned out that the temperature was the antidote. Once Kai placed the crew members into the cooling compartment to detoxify, the Nautilus was still on a collision course with the volcano. At that moment, Lucas, feeling a bit more energized, noticed that the entire ship had grown eerily quiet. She searched the ship and found that everyone had lost consciousness. Outside the cooling compartment, Lucas and Kai met up. Lucas learned from Kai that once the dark spot spread to the eyes, humans would lose consciousness. The only way to address this symptom was by reducing the temperature. Lucas decided to put on her diving gear and go outside to remove the eel's fin, while Kai was in charge of controlling the direction. Fortunately, everyone had been trained, so one person could wear the diving suit alone. Lucas struggled to suppress her fear as she climbed into the diving compartment and opened the water valve. As the water rose, a glowing red color appeared beneath her feet. Despite her overwhelming fear, she managed to overcome it and jumped out. Lucas grabbed the rope on the side of the ship and swam towards the bow of the Nautilus. However, by this point, the dark spot had reached her face. Lucas began to show signs of excitement, and as she swam out, she saw her teammates inside the ship. At that moment, she suddenly experienced a hallucination. Lucas saw the day her father passed away, a painful memory that had haunted her. As she became lost in the illusion, her father's voice broke through and awakened her. His words gave her strength. She wiped away her tears and continued with her mission. Lucas endured the scorching heat as she swam towards the front of the ship. However, when she was only 5 meters away from the eel's fin, she suddenly realized that the rope wasn't long enough. Without hesitation, she cut the rope, making sure there was no turning back. When Lucas jumped out, she managed to grab the eel's fin, and at the same time, the Nautilus was teetering on the edge of life and death. Lucas put all her strength. Not only had she to match the speed of the Nautilus, but she also had to fight off the symptoms of the infection. Once the eel's fin was removed, the Nautilus changed course, narrowly avoiding the erupting volcano. But due to inertia, Lucas was thrown off the ship. She struggled to hold on to the Nautilus, but the hull was too slippery, and she couldn't find anything to grab. Ultimately, Lucas was thrown off the ship. As the temperature dropped, the crew members aboard the Nautilus began to regain consciousness. As they celebrated their survival, Nemo realized that Lucas hadn't returned. He immediately ordered the ship to turn around because he didn't want to lose any more teammates. Fortunately, they quickly found Lucas. However, when Nemo brought her back aboard, he discovered that she had stopped breathing. The entire crew was heartbroken, except for Gustav, who did not give up. He removed parts from the electric rifle to create a crude defibrillator. If one attempt wasn't enough, he would try again. Fortunately, Lucas had woken up, and she was greeted with cheers. Nemo also officially accepted her as a member of the Nautilus crew. Once Lucas had recovered, she mentioned something strange. While she was outside the ship, as the oxygen was running out and she was about to suffocate, she seemed to have seen an ancient structure. Lucas thought it was just a hallucination, but Gustav was very intrigued when he heard this. It sounded like the lost civilization he had been searching for all these years. Nemo, on the other hand, only felt that Gustav was just joking. He believed it to be a legend from the Atlantic Ocean, not the Pacific. However, Gustav presented evidence in the form of a map he had found in the Casimir Library. But Nemo, uninterested in Atlantis, explained that his goal was to find treasure at the bottom of the sea, then to equip weapons to take revenge on the East India Company. Atlantis was only suitable for archaeological exploration. Its potential benefits seemed too small. However, when Nemo saw that Lucas agreed to the expedition, and with Gustav constantly bringing up the topic, Nemo realized that Gustav's desire to explore was just as strong as his thirst for revenge. Exploring the deep sea had also been Gustav's dream. In the end, Nemo agreed to the expedition. Seeing it as a way to fulfill Gustav's dream, a 5-person expedition team was formed. The soldier had planned to catch some fish, but Gustav stopped them. This was an archaeological exploration, not a hunting trip. Gustav handed electric rifles to everyone, and when the diving compartment door opened, they officially began their expedition to Atlantis. Lucas had indeed not been mistaken. Gustav kicked a stone into the deep abyss, and when the sound of it falling echoed, a strange light appeared. This was the Atlantis that Gustav had been searching for all these years. The path was made of 6-sided stone pillars. Gustav also discovered a staircase, but just as everyone was excitedly exploring, a huge black shadow moved toward them. The group followed the steps down into a spacious area, and based on the direction of the flowing water above, they realized there must be a cave. They removed the heavy equipment from their bodies and swam up. They quickly surfaced and began lighting flares to begin their exploration. Gustav found a plant species they had never seen before, but the area seemed too small for a city. Cuff stayed behind to keep watch while the others ventured further inside. Lucas discovered fossils on the walls, walls, identifying them as sea millipedes, creatures that had existed for over 400 million years. As Lucas excitedly explained this marine life form, she suddenly noticed a soldier standing off to the side. Trembling, when she went over, she saw a terrifying sight. Millipedes that were supposed to be extinct, as described in books, were everywhere. Lucas tried to pull the millipedes off the soldier's body, but couldn't remove them. Fortunately, her flashlight broke, and thinking quickly, she used a shard of it to cut the millipedes off. However, Lucas's diving suit was torn in the process. Nemo quickly arrived, illuminated by the flares, and saw that the walls were covered with ancient creatures. The team had no choice but to retreat quickly. But Gustav, who had struggled to reach this point, was so excited that he began trying to crawl into the walls, oblivious to the danger behind him. Meanwhile, Nemo and the others had already made it outside. The sea millipedes were afraid of light, using magnesium and oxygen to create a flare that could stop them. But Nemo had to go back to find Gustav. Before leaving, he handed over command of the Nautilus to Lucas, telling her that if he didn't return, she would be the captain. As the two said their goodbyes, Gustav was also able to get inside, where he discovered a glowing stone beneath the earth. However, before Gustav could figure out what it was, Nemo ran over and told him to get outside. The two of them hurriedly left, thinking that with the light, they would be able to return safely. However, the light was limited, and when the surroundings grew completely dark, the sea millipedes rushed toward them. They could only run for their lives. When they were only 10 meters away from the exit, Gustav was knocked down by the sea millipedes. He could only crawl toward Nemo, but as soon as their hands touched, Gustav was dragged away by the swarm. He looked at Nemo with a determined gaze, just like the look they shared when they stood up to resist in prison. Nemo understood Gustav's intent and grabbed the glowing stone. Gustav was pulled into the darkness, while Nemo accidentally broke his protective suit. The three who had run ahead were now in danger as well. A swarm of unidentified sea creatures attacked them, and Lucas's bleeding wound attracted a school of sharks. Just at that moment, the electric rifle worked, and Nemo staggered out of the tunnel. However, he fainted from suffocation. It seemed he had held his breath the entire way. At that moment, Cuff put his helmet on Nemo and helped him back to the Nautilus. Although they had successfully escaped, they had lost Gustav forever. Nemo clutched the glowing stone in his hand. It was Gustav's dream had been passed on to him. The crew was deeply sorrowful, and while Lucas was organizing Gustav's relics, Nemo accidentally discovered a recording tape. It contained a conversation between Gustav and Lucas, recorded by chance. In fact, Gustav knew that Nemo had taken the Nautilus to seek revenge, but he still firmly supported him becoming the captain. Gustav hoped that the world beneath the sea could heal Nemo's broken heart. The crew tried to comfort each other, and they continued heading toward the Arctic. But as Nemo and Lucas were discussing the scenery, a cannon shot rang out from behind. It turned out that the ship Red Knot had caught up with them. Nemo immediately ordered the crew to speed up. They planned to dive beneath the ice shelf to escape from the Red Knot. Nemo decided to take the risk and steer an instant to make the Red Knot crash into the iceberg. The captain of the Red Knot saw that the Nautilus showed no signs of slowing down, and he fell right into the trap. He immediately ordered his soldiers to speed up and pursue them. However, Nemo made a huge mistake by miscalculating the Nautilus's diving distance, causing them to crash directly into the ice surface. The Red Knot fared worse, as the inertia caused it to crash deep into the frozen waters. Fortunately, the friction between the two ships slowed their momentum significantly. The Red Knot eventually came to a halt, but they discovered that the propeller was stuck. In this temperature, no one could last more than a minute underwater. They were completely trapped. Meanwhile, the Nautilus also had problems. The impact had damaged its components, and they needed a forge to repair the parts. The Red Knot had a forge, so Nemo had no choice but to go aboard and negotiate. Count Pitt of the Red Knot thought Nemo had come to surrender, so he ordered the soldiers to open fire, but Captain Youngblood stopped him. Youngblood wanted to hear Nemo's conditions. Nemo's request was very simple. He only needed Youngblood to agree to lend him the forge to repair the components on the Nautilus. Nemo promised that he would pull the Red Knot out of the situation, but if Youngblood insisted on taking the Nautilus, Nemo's crew would set the ship to explode, and everyone would die from the cold. Youngblood agreed to the deal, but made one request. Lucas's fiancée was aboard the Red Knot. Youngblood hoped that Lucas would join them. However, Nemo refused, and Lucas stated that she was not an object to be traded. Whether she stayed or left was her choice. After both sides shook hands on the agreement, Nemo returned to the Nautilus. He didn't want Lucas to leave, but he had no reason to hold on to her. The terms of the deal were that the two ships had to be tethered together. However, the crew of the Nautilus was mocked by the soldiers on the Red Knot's deck. The soldiers said they were born to be slaves, which made the tension between the two sides escalate. While Lucas was busy working on the forge, Youngblood and Nemo agreed to organize a competition to ease the tension between the two crews. The rules were simple. Meanwhile, Lucas was facing a problem of her own. She had never actually met her fiancé. Everything had been arranged by her mother. The two of them seemed awkward, and Count Pitt remarked that women should stay at home and take care of children, while the heavy work was for the slaves. Lucas only glanced at him and did not respond. Pitt failed to win Lucas's favor, and in the end, had no choice but to participate in the match, where he vented his frustration on the crew. However, his arrogance led his soccer team to a crushing defeat. Meanwhile, Lucas had finished repairing the components and handed them over to Nemo to take back to the ship. In her heart, she had already made up her mind to return to the Nautilus and continue the expedition, but Pitt refused. He had given Lucas's mother many dowries, and logically, Lucas belonged to him. Pitt was determined not to let her leave. His soldiers captured Lucas and locked her in a room. Pitt, holding formal attire, insisted that she wear it and join him for dinner. However, after seeing the magnificent world beneath the sea, Lucas was no longer the proud, aristocratic young lady she once was. She wanted to live the life she desired. The housekeeper also sided with Lucas. She drew a knife and stabbed Pitt in the leg. The two of them began to run, while Nemo was directing everyone to secure the chains. Nemo looked toward the red knot in the distance but could not spot Lucas. Just as he was wondering whether to wait a little longer, Lucas was surrounded by soldiers. Fortunately, her experience with exploration made her agile. She grabbed the rope on the ship and slid down onto the ice. Since both sides were still negotiating, the soldiers did not dare to fire. They had no choice but to let Lucas return to the Nautilus. Nemo joyfully welcomed Lucas back. As the engine roared to life, the Nautilus began to move at full power. The chains tightened with a loud sound, and the crew could feel the pull from behind. The red knot was dragged out of the ice, but just as they escaped danger, Pitt ordered his soldiers to fire the cannons, intending to sink the Nautilus. Fortunately, Captain Youngblood stopped him. Youngblood told Pitt that unilaterally breaking the truce was not the behavior of a nobleman, but Pitt didn't care. He only wanted revenge on Nemo. Ignoring Youngblood's objections, Pitt rushed to the cannon, knocking over the soldiers. He punched Youngblood in the face. Although Pitt aimed well, the fuse hadn't ignited yet, so the cannonball failed to explode, merely denting the Nautilus. Furious, Pitt was about to fire again when Youngblood threatened him with a gun. He warned that if either side acted first, the truce would be over. Nemo had no idea what was happening on the red knot. He assumed they were trying to attack the Nautilus, so he angrily grabbed a hammer and went to the deck to cut the chain. A battle broke out immediately under the orders of the red knot's officer. The soldiers began firing at the Nautilus, but Nemo stood alone, enduring the attack. Miraculously, he wasn't hit by any bullets. Eventually, he managed to safely retreat into the ship's interior. As the Nautilus sank beneath the ocean to escape the red knot, Nemo made a risky decision. He would try to navigate through the Arctic region, but if they ran out of oxygen before they reached their destination, they would be trapped there forever. The movie ends here. Thank you all for watching, goodbye, and see you in the next videos. Bye-bye.